When the world sleeps, the importance of midnight prayers, the hidden hour, the clock struck midnight in a quiet neighborhood of Lagos, Nigeria. Streetlights flickered, and the world outside was still, save for the occasional howl of a distant dog. But within a small, two-bedroom apartment on the top floor of a modest building, light seeped through the curtain cracks. Inside, knelt a woman in fervent prayer. Her name was Esther. To anyone else, she was just a middle-aged single mother of two, working as a nurse by day and barely making ends meet. But to the heavens, she was a warrior. This is the story of how midnight prayers transformed her life, and the lives of many around her. It is also a testimony to the power, the significance, and the spiritual necessity of communing with God in the midnight hour. Esther's burden. Esther had learned the power of midnight prayer from her grandmother. Mama Nneka, a fiery woman of faith, had raised her after her parents died in a car accident when she was 8. Mama Nneka would always wake up at 11:55 p.m., tie her scarf tightly, and pace around the house speaking in tongues. The midnight hour, she would say, is when heaven's gates open and hell's plans are being finalized. That is when a warrior must rise. The spiritual wisdom of her grandmother etched itself into Esther's heart, but like many spiritual seeds, it took the right conditions to blossom. Life's struggles had made her weary, and over time, the demands of daily living dulled her spiritual discipline. She married, had children, and after her husband abandoned them for another woman, she became the sole provider. The night was for sleeping, not praying. Until the dreams started, dark dreams. Terrifying visions. A man with red eyes whispering her name. Her children falling from heights. Chains binding her hands. Each time she woke up at 12:03 a.m., drenched in sweat, a sense of dread clinging to her like morning dew. She turned to the only weapon she remembered, prayer. Midnight prayer is more than a routine. It is a sacrifice, an offering of one's most vulnerable hour to God. It is warfare in a time of peace. It is speaking life when the world is silent. It is engaging the spirit realm when the natural realm slumbers. The call to arms. At first, it was difficult. Esther would kneel beside her bed with a Bible, struggling to stay awake. Her lips would move, but her thoughts wandered. The darkness seemed louder than her prayers. But the attacks grew stronger, and so did her determination. She began setting her alarm for 11:55 p.m. and prayed till 1 a.m., then 2 a.m. Sometimes she dozed off mid-prayer, but she always got back up. She didn't know that as she prayed, she was breaking chains. One night, as she prayed Psalm 91 aloud, she felt a presence in the room. A warm wind blew despite the closed windows. Her lips quivered, and she began speaking in tongues, something she hadn't done since her youth. That night, she saw a vision, her son, David, standing tall on a podium, receiving a scholarship in America. Midnight prayer connects the spirit with divine revelation. It is a time of visions, dreams, and encounters. The spiritual frequency is heightened because the distractions of the day are. Midnight prayer connects the spirit with divine revelation. It is a time of visions, dreams, and encounters. The spiritual frequency is heightened because the distractions of the day are gone. Esther tapped into this divine line, and the messages came pouring in. The next morning, she fasted. Not out of obligation, but out of hunger, a hunger for God's will, God's presence, God's voice. Midnight watchers. Soon, Esther began sharing her midnight prayer sessions with others. First her friend Grace, who was struggling with infertility. Then her neighbor, Mr. Ade, who was battling depression. Before long, a group of 7 gathered every Friday night in her living room. Calling themselves the Midnight Watchers, testimonies followed. Grace conceived after 7 years of waiting. Mr. Ade was delivered from suicidal thoughts after a powerful midnight intercession. A local gang disbanded after the group began targeting their activities in prayer. They learned that midnight prayer was not just personal, it was territorial. It reclaims lands, families, destinies. In Luke 6 verse 12, Jesus spent the whole night in prayer before choosing his disciples. In Acts 16 verse 25, Paul and Silas prayed at midnight, and the prison doors flung open. These weren't coincidences, they were spiritual strategies. Midnight prayers provoked divine intervention. Esther kept a journal, chronicling dreams, visions, and breakthroughs. Each entry was a stone of remembrance, an altar in ink. The battle for David, Esther's eldest son, David, once a bright boy, was falling into bad company. Skipping school. Hanging with street boys. Stealing. Esther's heart broke daily. One night, after an intense midnight prayer, Esther had a vision of David being shot in a street fight. She cried out to God in desperation. That week, David was arrested. While many saw it as shame, Esther saw it as salvation. He was sentenced to 3 months in a juvenile center. There, he met a chaplain who introduced him to Christ. The boy who returned home was not the same one who left. He joined the Midnight Watchers. Midnight prayers saved David's life. They intercepted a premature death. They rewrote his story. City on fire, word of the Midnight Watchers spread. Esther's living room could no longer contain them. They rented a small hall. It quickly filled up, miracles increased. People were healed of diseases. Businesses turned around. Addicts were delivered, but so did opposition. One night, while praying, Esther felt an intense evil presence. She collapsed, convulsing. For hours, others prayed over her. She later shared what she saw, a principality that ruled over the city, furious at their prayers. It had tried to silence her, but it failed. For every midnight prayer, another soul was snatched from hell. Every intercession tore a hole in the darkness. Global Ripples. A documentary filmmaker heard about the group and made a short film. It went viral. Invitations poured in. Esther traveled to Kenya, Ghana, South Africa, and even the UK. Everywhere she went, she taught about the power of the midnight hour. Meanwhile, back in Lagos, her group grew to thousands. Midnight prayers became a movement. Churches reintroduced midnight vigils. Families began praying together again. One particular testimony stood out. A man in Ukraine watched a midnight session online and was saved from suicide. A woman in Brazil testified that her long-lost son returned home after she joined the prayers. The spiritual science. Esther invited a Christian psychiatrist. Joined the prayers. The spiritual science. Esther invited a Christian psychiatrist and a theologian to one of their sessions. They explained that the brain is most sensitive in the early hours of the morning. Demonic activity often intensifies between midnight and 3 a.m. Spiritually, it's a crossover between days, a time when covenants are made or broken. Prayer during this hour is strategic. It is not emotionalism. It is spiritual intelligence. Jesus himself chose lonely places to pray in the early hours. Midnight prayer aligns the soul, body, and spirit with God's frequency. Trials of a warrior. With popularity came temptations. Fake prophets tried to join for money. Politicians wanted to use her movement for power. Esther stayed rooted. She turned down millions in donations that came with strings. She reminded her group, "This is war, not business." At 55, her health began to fail. Doctors advised rest. But she pressed on, her voice hoarse, her back aching, but her spirit alight. One night, she fainted while praying. The room grew silent. Then the prayers intensified. They fought for her, Esther's legacy. She was hospitalized for weeks. The nation prayed. David, now a pastor, took over the movement temporarily. Under his leadership, the Watchers expanded into Europe and America. Esther recovered but reduced her public appearances. She focused on writing, mentoring, and midnight online sessions that reached over 100,000 viewers weekly. She published a book titled, The Hidden Hour, Reclaiming Midnight for God. The message was clear: the midnight hour belongs to God. Lessons in the Dark. Esther began training leaders across the globe. They set up watchtowers, homes or churches dedicated to midnight intercession. The curriculum included spiritual warfare basics, understanding dreams and visions, the biblical history of night prayers, discerning spiritual atmospheres. She emphasized three things: purity, persistence, and prophetic insight. The sound of midnight. At exactly midnight every night, thousands across the globe rise, some in whispered tongues, some in loud declarations, all because one woman decided not to sleep through her spiritual calling. And though the world sleeps, they war. For midnight is no longer just an hour, it is a battleground, and the watchers stand guard. If you like this video, please subscribe to this channel so any time we upload you will be notified. If you like this video, please hit the subscribe button for more.